Perfect. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. If it's your first time here, we do these calls once a month for 60 minutes, and we're very grateful for everyone who attends and engages. And that's really our hope with these. Is they're not it's not us broadcasting information. It's everyone engaging in dialogue and discussion. And we accept questions from the community by email, or we check out the comments on Instagram when we announce these. But if you show up in person, you get priority. So your questions will be asked, or will be answered rather, or spoken about first. So thank you for being here. Looks like everyone's done it, but I was going to mention, if you haven't already, please mute your mic so that we can eliminate background noise. And during the course of this, if you're not speaking, just keep your mic muted. I think it just makes it easy. And if you want to speak, just unmute and go for it. So today's call is all about ankle mobility. And before we get into the topic, I'm going to hand it over to Ruth, and she's going to say a few things.
Yes. So my name is Ruth, for those of you that I haven't met yet, and I want to second what Nick said by thanking you for taking time out of your life and your schedule to be here with us when you could be anywhere. And we take your attention and your time, and we appreciate that. So we want to make sure and just tell you right off the bat that we are really happy that you're here with us. And the format of our call tonight is going to be, we're going to first start with unpacking the main topic, which is ankle mobility. So we'll start by discussing that to everybody's satisfaction. Nick will give like a little presentation to start, and then we'll open it up for questions about what he's talking about. And then the second portion of the call will be all about whatever you have come to ask a question about tonight. So the format typically is that if you're not here live, you've submitted a question by email, and if there's time at the end of the call, when everybody has had their questions answered, if there's time to address some of those email questions, we'll do that as well. But what we would like to do is have just everybody, and you're not obligated to do this, but if you wouldn't mind, we would like you to just go around and unmute yourself, say your name and where you're calling in from, just so we can know who's here and really get a feel for what we have going on tonight group-wise, and then we'll get started. So if whatever question that you have, we're going to save that till the second portion, so let's not unpack that yet. We'll save that for later. So what we'll do is we'll do a free-for-all, and you guys can all unmute yourself and then figure out how to say who's going first.
And it maybe say your name, where you're calling from, but also why you're here. Like if we're not, there's some people on the call that we recognize that are foot nerds, but if you're not a foot nerd, let us know why you're here so that we can try and do our best to meet that reason and make sure you get from this what some sort of value. So yeah.
Exactly. And if you are a foot nerd, say that.
say that.
Say it.
All right. Floor is anyone's.
Okay, you want me to?
That
Yes.
always happens.
It always happens.
Everyone waits. It's like, it's all right.
I'm trying to get good lighting. I'm Liz. I'm a foot nerd from Duluth, Minnesota. Hi. What's up?
What's up, Liz?
Hey, I'll jump in. I'm Aaron Cooper. I'd be on video, but I just literally jumped off the bike on a 3-hour ride, so I'm sweating like crazy. Yeah, I'm Portland, Oregon. Just a big fan of the Foot Collective, and I honestly can't tell if that's you, Nick, with a big beard, or
it is.
It is. So we met a long time ago. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Well, good to not see you, but good to hear you.
And we should catch up, by the way. I was 25 years at Nike. I've been gone from Nike for about 3 years.
I know Aaron Cooper now. I know. I was like, there's a lot of Coopers that I know, but now I know exactly who you are.
But I've been doing some work with Vivo, and just a huge fan of the foot, basically. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks for showing me around Nike when I was there. That was a pretty cool experience. So thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, we should catch up.
Don't make me call on you.
Hey guys, Nick, a fellow Nick Holt I'm calling from Tamarindo, Costa Rica. I'm a foot nerd. And yeah, some familiar faces in here. So it's good to be here. Just struggled with ankle mobility. And yeah, I was like really excited when I saw this to be the topic. So I have my questions, but I look forward to seeing what you have to present, Nick, and just being here and being part of this lovely community.
Thanks for taking time out of your day.
Yeah.
Like Ruth said, anyone here could be anywhere doing anything, and you chose to be here, and that means a lot to us. So thanks everyone for being here.
I'll jump in. Hey, my name is Megan. I'm calling from Nova Scotia, Canada. Again, same, I would also jump on video, but I'm in the tub right now, so we won't do that. I just recently actually found the Foot Collective. I'm dealing with a subtalar injury. So I've been trying to kind of navigate that and trying to work on my ankle mobility and ankle strength. So yeah, this is my first call that I've ever been a part of, but I really liked what I saw on Instagram. So I thought I owed it to myself and my healing to jump on and see what I can learn.
Awesome. Seems like a very appropriate call for you from the sound of it. So
Awesome.
Hi, my name is Amanda, and like everyone else, I'm unable to show my face right now. But I'm here from Vancouver, Canada, or British Columbia, Canada. And I've had some ankle mobility issues myself, and I just wanted to know if I can gain more insight.
awesome.
So if nobody else jumps in, then I'll assume that you would rather not, say your name and who you are, and that's perfectly great, except for our friend Alex. Go for it.
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm from Mexico. I'm on week 3 of the Foot Nerd course life-changing experience. I first found Foot Collective a few years ago when no one could solve my Achilles issues, and just switching into more barefoot lifestyle and more grounding. I'm just sitting on the floor now and doing all this little tiny modifications to my life that I learned through your Instagram really impacted my health in a very good way. So I'm here to learn and engage and hopefully help more people change their lives with really tiny changes that make a huge difference.
Amazing. And Alex didn't say it, but
She's a foot nerd.
that person is an elite long distance running athlete. Like, I don't use elite lightly. So yeah, thanks for being here, and glad everything's helping you. Thanks for being a foot nerd.
Yeah, thanks for being a foot nerd, Alex.
Well, thank you, guys.
All right, let's get going. So now, when Ruth said presentation, it's going to be fairly brief. I think brief is good, but I think saying these things before we get into questions, these things will hopefully give us good launch pads to consider when we're fielding questions or in dialogue. So to kick us off, I'm just going to say a few things. And I think the first one is that at TFC, we apply first principles thinking. And what that means is that we reason from what we know to for sure be true. And then we explore solutions from there. Instead of adopting previous solutions and trying to massage them, we kind of think, okay, what do we 100% know? And then we deduce based on that. And the 3 first principles that I think are super important for anyone to know, these are principles I wish would have been really emphasized for me in physical therapy school, because they form the foundation of the way I think about everything around health and human function. And they help a lot with feet. And the 3 first principles are the SAID principle, which stands for specific adaptation to impose demand. And that really just means whatever you do with your body adapts to it. So we can unpack that more later. So the SAID principle, the principle that the body is a self-organizing system. So you don't have to worry about making sure it's doing the right thing. It knows how to do the right thing. It's very, very smart, very intelligent technology that we have that we just kind of take for granted. And it organizes itself based on how we use it. And then the 3rd principle is that the body's self-healing. So, we can see that obviously if you cut your skin will heal. It's pretty insane, actually. It's incredible. We kind of take it for granted. But if you accept that the body heals itself, the body organizes itself without us needing to do anything, the only thing we have to worry about are the inputs we provide our body, which according to the SAID principle determines how our bodies adapt. So those are really important things to get out of the way. And then I just wanted to make a few points specific to ankles, sort of from a high level. So I think the first one is that how you use your ankles determines your ankle function. So whatever function you've got is a direct reflection of how you've used your ankles throughout your entire life. Okay, that's a good thing to put a pin on. So, meaning if you don't move your ankles, they get stiff. If you limit the range through which your ankles can move, they lose the ability to move through full functional range. And that has a big bearing on the footwear we wear, right? Most footwear we wear, if it has an elevated heel, it is going to restrict the range through which your ankles can move. It will not let you explore dorsiflexion as much. And it will recalibrate your body's functional range into a weird range of motion that is not natural for humans, okay? If your feet are dysfunctional, your ankles are going to be negatively affected. If your hips are dysfunctional, your ankles are going to be negatively affected. And what I often see is when people wear shoes that do not allow their feet to function like they're supposed to, and they spend prolonged periods of time sitting in chairs, that removes their ability of their hips to do what they're supposed to. The ankles, in order to deal with all that instability at the hips and at the feet, essentially they become kind of like spot welds. And a spot weld is if you have two pieces of metal and you just want to tack them together so that they're not moving all the time, you put a weld there and it stops it. So when your ankle becomes a spot weld to stabilize as a reaction to your hips and feet being unstable, the ankles get locked up. And like I said, the instability of the hips comes from chairs and the instability of the foot comes from shoes. And so a lot of times, when I was treating people in clinic as a physio, people that came in with ankle problems, it was never the ankle that was the problem. The ankle was the symptom, the byproduct of issues coming from above and below. And when you see that, you can't really unsee it. And the last thing I'll say is, if you spend a lot of time sitting in a chair each day, the muscles that cross your ankle, mostly your calf muscle, get overworked. One thing I like to say is that your calves become your glutes, right? Your calves if your hips can't do what they're supposed to, if your glutes can't help with propulsion, then your calves now have to do the work of your calves and the work of your glutes. And the work of the glutes is a massive workload. And so when your calf just gets so overworked from doing jobs it's not supposed to, it can get really tight. And that can result in your ankle not being able to move because that muscle group crosses your ankle joint. So when we look at dorsiflexion, it really is, dorsiflexion is if your foot was planted on the ground, your knee moving forward, that's dorsiflexion. Whereas if you're sitting down with your foot dangling, pointing your toes is plantar flexion. So P for plantar flexion, pointing your toes. Dorsiflexion is if you brought your toes up towards your knee. So I think we'll probably throw around those terms today. Probably good for everyone to have like an understanding of those. And when we look at ankles, it's not just a single variable thing, right? We have to look at multiple variables. The hip plays into it, the foot plays into it, but all of these symptoms that people get, all these issues people have, they all have solutions. We don't know what the solution to your ankle mobility problem is, but we do know a process of troubleshooting the body such that you can discover what the cause is and you can resolve it. And that's really what we aim to do at TFC, is empower people with an understanding of how the body works, so that they don't need to rely on us for answers. We want people to feel empowered that they understand the process to figure out their own answers, because you're the only one that can solve your ankle problem, really. It might be convenient for health professionals to think that it's their job to do it or that they can do it, but the reality is they can't. And it turns out that like a high school kid can understand this framework, this process. And so anyone can take ownership of their ankle issues if they're ready to invest the energy and the time into really understanding it. And all of that is basically packaged into Health Kit, which is one of our digital products. But that's all I'll say to kind of open things up. So I think now it might be just good to, the bigger the group, the harder it is to kind of harness and coordinate to make sure this isn't just like mayhem, but we'll do our best. And so I'll open the floor to anyone to bring up any of those points that I talked about, or any points of discussion. Let's save specific questions till the end, but let's maybe open it up for 15 minutes and talk about anything people want to talk about.
And I say part of my experience with my ankles.
Please do.
I had just my ankles were absolutely locked up for a few years, and like they would just tell me to stretch my calves and stuff, and it didn't work. So I started like exploring my own body and see what would actually make me regain the mobility of it. And I found the link that if my hips are too tight or my glutes are not like properly firing up before my runs, my ankles will stiff up. So like hearing you say that the ankles do the job of the hips and the glutes, like, well, the calves will do the job and the ankles will just lock up, makes a lot of sense. And I think it's something we should like take into account, not just for the ankles, but for everything. Like everything's connected, right? So I think that's on our and the food is like the root of everything, because if it's not working properly down there, then we're gonna have a lot of flarings everywhere else. So that's been my experience. Like if it's there, like definitely look up into whatever it is connected.
Yeah, well said. And when you said everything's connected, it's like when the calves essentially become rocks and cannot do anything, cannot lengthen and contract because they're just there for stability, not for being able to like exert force, they get burned out. And eventually the next domino falls, where like maybe it's your low back next that's having to do way too much, or maybe it's X, Y, Z. So, you know, we often get distracted with where the symptoms are trickling into. And a lot of times that's wasted energy, because really we, you know, when you address the root cause, which I think fundamentally two giant root causes are shoes and chairs, not necessarily them in and of themselves, but the dosage and the type of shoes we wear and the dosage that we consume chairs in. If we don't address those two things, the other problem, it's like whack-a-mole, right? You solve one problem and then another one pops up, because it's just a cascading series of events. So yeah, and the good news there is once you do address the root cause, all the things start to unwind on their own. You don't even have to address all the individual issues. Like your body starts to work and organize in an efficient way. And it's not like you have, you know, I think when people have injuries, they look at it like a laundry list. I got to deal with this, then I got to deal with this and this. It's like, no. If you just deal with the thing that's causing all the other stuff first, the list kind of like melts away effortlessly. But you have to know where those root causes are. And I just think that's where people get lost. And if they know that, it's way more straightforward process.
You know, and I will say here too, like going through the health kit has been an interesting experience for me, because like you were saying, we tend to compartmentalize our laundry list of issues. And even though I know better, I still kind of start to do that. But one thing I notice is just unpacking, you know, whatever experiments we're working with at the time, because there's lots that we can try. It still sort of comes back to moving the whole body as a unit, like Alex was saying, and you were saying, is that everything is connected. And I think oftentimes we forget that we work on the experiments, we try to solve the mysteries of what's happening, but then putting it all together in like some very nourishing whole body, big play kind of movements where you can feel how everything's connected seems to be like a very humongous piece to the puzzle. You know, like we talk about being playful in our, in our explorations, even when we're trying to solve big problems with like painful injuries or chronic tension patterns. And it still kind of always seems to come back to how does it feel when you move the whole body as a unit, even after you've addressed specifically the ankles or the hips? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes. I think that sounds a lot like hardware, software, the idea that, you know, when your parts aren't moving like they're supposed to, that means you have a hardware problem. Like you need to literally just get those parts moving. But the actual more important part is in order to hit control save on the work you did to get that part moving, you have to update your software. You have to integrate that hardware into a whole body movement pattern so that your body has a new way of using that part. Because if it just uses the old software, it's not going to explore the new area you just opened up, and it's going to get taken back from you. Like you haven't earned the right to keep mobility somewhere that you worked so hard to gain because you didn't integrate it into a functional pattern into day-to-day life. And that little bit is like people put in so much work to do tissue release and mobilize joints and open up capsules. And like I saw it all the time. But if they don't integrate it, you end up doing the same thing every day because you haven't actually hit control save, right? It's like, imagine you have this document that you're editing And every time you're done your work for the day, it's never completed. So you're tweaking it a little bit. Every time you close it down, you got to restart the next day. That would be terrible, right? That's not efficient. No, you want to hit control save so you can pick up where you left off. And I think the integration piece is incorporating that into movement, in whatever movement that you enjoy doing, right? And even if we look at that one layer deeper, it's like the hardware you're getting moving should be in order to do the movements you want to do. This is another thing with ankles I saw all the time. People are like, well, I need more ankle mobility. It's like, well, how much are you going for? They're like, more. I just want more. Like, you're going to be at this a while. Like, you should probably know, what are you working towards? Because it's going to make it way more meaningful and purposeful. And also, it's like, you don't want to be doing this forever. Like, when you have enough, that's enough. Just move every day to maintain it and earn the right to keep it. Yeah, that was sort of a tangent, but.
Hey, Nick, I'm curious, this is Aaron. I'm curious if the root causes are footwear, shoes, and chairs. And footwear we can, use either go barefoot or, if we're out of the house, we need to, most of us need to put shoes on.
Yep.
And we can decide there are, great barefoot footwear options. What would you say to those that do have to sit for a good portion of their day at work or at home? Well, let's just use work because that's, kind of more of a social issue where, if you don't have a standing desk, if you don't have a desk that you can move up and down, certainly can't sit on the floor. You have to sit in in the chair that you're issued. What's the alternative? What do you suggest for people to address that root cause?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's helpful to break down sitting into categories, and the two main categories are optional and non-optional. What sitting we consider to be optional is subjective, and I think once someone knows the importance, or once someone knows how harmful sitting in a chair is for prolonged periods of time is, it makes some of the optional sitting become less seemingly, or makes some of the non-optional sitting be up for debate, right? Like if you know that sitting all day at work is going to cause you back pain or is giving you back pain, it's really hard for your employer to be like, no, you're not allowed to do anything but sit in this chair. You will sit. Like it's really hard for them to pull that. But even aside from that, optional sitting, non-optional sitting, regardless of how you view that, I don't have a car that I can stand in yet. Like certainly if you travel, you must sit. If you're in a plane, train, you're probably going to sit. If you're at work in a board meeting, you're probably going to sit in a chair. And I think you should. So then it becomes, okay, the optional sitting, what other ways can I rest my body, right? Can I sit on the floor? Can I sit differently in a chair? Can I cross my legs in a chair? Can I sit on a bench that doesn't have a back, that's hard, so that after 30 minutes my ass is sore and that's a signal to move? So I think there's a lot we can do with optional sitting. For non-optional sitting, it's about, well, what can I do to offset the time I spent sitting, right? Like for every hour of sitting, if I did 5 minutes of like focused hip release to release some of the tension in the front of my hip and maybe even like, mobilize into some hip extension, there's things you can do to offset the non-optional sitting. And I think as you move forward, people start to accept that, wow, some of the non-optional sitting, some of the sitting I thought wasn't optional, turns out it is kind of optional. Because now I know how bad it is for me to constantly train hip flexion. It's messing up everything. It's stopping me from running. That means it's now important enough for me to say, no, at work, I need a standing desk. And guess what? If your work doesn't want to give you a standing desk, make the ugliest standing desk ever. Take like some milk crates and cardboard and make your own. And then when they say that thing's hideous, we're just going to buy you one. You'll be like, okay, fine. So I think we just have to get creative, and we all have to find our own capacity where it's like, well, if I sit more than this much, I'm going to pay the price, and everyone's this much will be different. I think the action path is just sit in chairs less. 10 minutes less tomorrow, half an hour less the day after. You get rid of your couch. That can easily remove, make your couch less convenient to sit in. That can be like an hour less of sitting in the hip 90-90 position. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think,
it's good.
Yeah, I think just offsetting the sitting you have to do, and then discovering different ways to sit when you have to sit. I think, that's my best answer.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
No worries.
Anybody
Also,
else? Oh,
yeah,
go ahead, Aaron.
since nobody else is going to jump in, I'll ask one more because a lot of time, I mean, we hear a lot about, the whole body system, of course, the joints all, working together. So, whether it's the hips, low back, hips, knees, ankles, your foot, like all those things, like if everything's connected and one thing is playing off the other and one thing can lock up the other, now, talking about the calves and all the, like, at some point it starts to get pretty overwhelming in terms of like, where do you even begin? I like the idea of the root causes being, certainly footwear you can control. And then I like what you suggested on the chairs. I'm just wondering if you've found a way to help people, who do have multiple issues or holistic issues, helping them just start kind of chipping away at it so it doesn't seem so overwhelming. And because a lot of people, if it's too overwhelming, they say, forget it. I'll just keep sitting on my couch drinking my beer. That's just human nature, unfortunately. Path of least resistance.
Yep.
So do you have a system in which you found with your clients, to help them kind of, just chip away at things and find success?
Yeah, I think if you change your footwear, if you switch to natural footwear, like if you have a stack of Jenga and you put a wedge under the stack, you have to place all these little blocks slightly differently up the Jenga stack to rebalance it, right? So this tiny foundational wedge, which can be super small, can create a huge amount of imbalances up the whole stack because the entire chain at every segment has to compensate slightly, right, to make up for that. So just the notion of switching to foot-shaped shoes that allow your feet to splay, which give you a more robust foundation, and removing the wedge from the heel, which stops all your joints upstream from having to stack slightly differently. I think when you switch to natural footwear, I think that's the easiest first step, no pun intended, because it's a one-time change. You buy a new pair of shoes. It's not like I got to do my mobility work every day. It's like every step you take in natural footwear is mobilizing your big toe, is mobilizing every joint in your foot, is firing the muscles, is giving fresh, true signals to the rest of your body about how it should orient itself to be stable, right? How it should organize itself for maximal efficiency. And the minute you have that true signal from the ground, everything gets clearer. The inputs get so much clearer for the rest of the body that things start to rearrange themselves. So I think and it obviously is contextual because it depends what the person's like focal issue is. Like certainly if you have immense low back pain, maybe sitting all day, sitting 12 hours in a chair is the biggest thing you should start to work on, right? Maybe your hips are ground zero for where you should probably start to work on. But the idea that shoes is just buy a pair of natural shoes and wear them and you're good. Like check that box off, be patient, and then you can start to look upstream. I think the foundation is the place to start because a good foundation, you can build a really strong house on. You don't want to start repairing your house when you got a glaring crack in your foundation and then have to do that later anyway, right?
Yeah.
So I think shoes are the linchpin, and shoes unleash this domino effect where things just start feeling better. Like this is what we hear at the store all the time. The guys that are in the store every day, this is what they hear as feedback is like, I just started feeling better when I wore natural shoes. And it makes perfect sense because the minute your body senses a sense of safety that it's stable on the ground and knows what the heck is going on, everything can just kind of chill a little bit, right? Like all these spot welds dissolve upstream when you have a stable foundation. And a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to troubleshoot in each individual spot weld, but they're there for a reason. And I think the big reason for most people is just a terribly unstable foundation. And then everything has to compensate upstream and it gets super confusing and you start to, it's overwhelming 100%. So start with shoes.
I was thinking that pain is probably, we discussed pain a lot on our last community call, but when Aaron was talking about people, like how it's just natural human behavior to stop moving when it's overwhelming, and it's usually overwhelming because it hurts. One of the things that we get lots of questions about is like, how to transition, because we have a tendency to maybe do too much too soon, and then you think that all of the injury, it's not working. But maybe Nick, talk a little bit if you want about pain, because and addressing like going slow, paying attention to your body signals, and then backing off, using trial and error as, being your own citizen scientist, that just because you get a pair of natural shoes or you get out of the chair regularly and often, it doesn't, you've said this, and we say this a lot about how it took a pretty long time for the situation to get, as painful as it is, or as disheartening as it is. So it takes a little time to undo that, and a lot of trial and error.
I don't think I need to say anything. That was really well said.
Well,
You're like, "Oh, you're welcome."
No, but really though, because I say this from personal experience, that I felt great when I switched to natural shoes, and I kept feeling better and better, and then I'd have a setback, and then I'd freak out because we don't want to be injured anymore. Like you don't want to have those same tension patterns, but or some of us who are working on ankle mobility, and it's disappointing if we're working diligently, but we're not getting the dorsiflexion that's needed. And it's, it is trial and error, and setbacks are part of it. So I know that from personal experience. That's why.
Yeah, I think just listening to discomfort, right? Like we need to just tune in. We need to think of it as important. We need to value reconnecting with our bodies enough that we actually spend energy paying attention to what it tells us. And, there's literally billions of dollars spent every year to numb us from what our body's telling us. Think of how crazy that is, right? Like people get, injections to numb body parts that are in pain, in tendons that are in pain. They take pills to not let themselves feel pain. And if pain is the lesson, it's like you're skipping the lesson. You don't get to continue. You have to retake that lesson until you actually listen to what the lesson's trying to tell you and make an adaptive change to that. So I think just tuning in, like being present. If you go on a walk, I go on at least one walk per day where there's nothing in my ears. I'm not, I have a calm mind, and I just like tune in. Like, how does my body actually feel? How do my hips feel? How do my toes feel? How do my feet feel? How does my back feel? You basically just do like a check-in. And once you start to kind of like tune in, to that, it's like you end up kind of knowing like, that doesn't feel so good right now. I think I'm gonna do a little bit of this to see if I can open this up or make this feel better. And so at the start, it's like take care of the real big things, like go straight at sitting, go straight at shoes, get the natural shoes on your feet, start to get more variety in how you sit, right? It's not even that you have to do extra things. This is the beauty of it, right? Like less is more. I really think health is less is more. A lot of times we've just been taught all these stories and all this information that is just not true. And most of it is built on a foundation that our bodies suck, which is not true. Our bodies are insanely advanced. And if we just get out of the way, it knows exactly what to do. So subtract things, just keep subtract the chair, subtract the technology, quote unquote, from your shoes. Just subtract the noise that's distracting you away from just like feeling your body. So focus on the big things, sitting in chairs, and then start subtracting things, and just, like spend time paying attention to what your body's telling you, because no one can do that for you. And I can't articulate it in words better than that, but that would be my best suggestion. Because once you start to gain confidence, it's like, you're like, oh, I'm getting this now. I'm feeling this. I'm feeling better. I'm building confidence that I can actually do this. I'm plugged into a community where I can ask a question or tune into a call and people can kind of help me out. So I think that all plays into this mixture of just people feeling empowered that they can reclaim natural movement, which feels really good and really empowering and really exciting for people who have been in pain for so long or have been unable to do the things that bring them huge amounts of joy. And it's kind of a shame, because those people end up seeking out the knowers, which are the disease care professionals, which aren't actually trained to get rid of the problem. I wasn't trained to get rid of problems as a physio. I was trained to diagnose and treat symptoms. Those might sound similar. They're not. They're very different. So we just have to take ownership ourselves. And by going through that myself and then comparing that to what I had in physio school, I was like, well, anyone can understand this. I'm not smarter or have access to wisdom that no one else does. It's just, I just realized most of my work in understanding this was actually just unlearning all the crap I learned in physio school. It wasn't even like groundbreaking stuff. I just paid attention, tried different things. The things that work, I kept doing them. The things that didn't work, I tried new things. And eventually I realized like shoes just messed up our feet. Our default state for feet is healthy, strong, pain-free, resilient, mobile. Our default state for our body is really good at moving. And if we just get back to the inputs that we would naturally have, so moving a lot each day with a lot of variety at all our body parts, everything kind of fixes itself.
Alex, go ahead.
Before we change subject, I think one way that has helped me to make it less overwhelming is to approach it like with curiosity and like in a more playful manner. So instead of saying I gotta fix this, is like, how can I move better, or where can I move today, or like play with my health kit or whatever. So it just feels less of a chore and more like an exploration of what can I do, and without thinking. As time goes by, I start detecting what works and what doesn't, and I just all of a sudden can do moves I couldn't do, and I'm not like putting a lot of attention into it. I'm just seeing what I can do today, and like you said, trying to listen, like, oh, this feels weird or this feels stiff. What if I move through this pattern or this pattern? So maybe like if we feel overwhelmed and we don't know like where is it coming from, just like address it with curiosity and maybe like more playful. Like, I don't know, like it's not like we're broken because our body's gonna fix itself. Just allow it to have the proper input to be able to do its job.
Very good point. Very good point. Play is the way.
So Nick, it's about 7. Do you want to wrap up this part and then hone in on people's questions that want to ask them?
Yep.
Okay.
Open 8:07. So we got 23 more minutes. Plenty of time for Q&A. No question is a bad question. No answers are guaranteed, but we'll do our best.
And it's
Yeah,
not,
Nick, I'd love to hear your thoughts about strength. Like after going through the health kit, I realized like it was really interesting when I looked at the tension on my calves versus my wife. Like my calves like never have any tension in them, versus my wife's like her calves are always sort of tensioned up. And so I was wondering, because I am limited in dorsiflexion and I've checked the hips, my foot seems to be okay, hip stability seems to be okay. And I wonder if it's just like, if I'm just weak and doing anterior tibialis raises or doing some calf raises, like, have you seen that translate into better sort of dorsiflexion? That's kind of where I'm at as far as like the next experiment, because a lot of the stuff that I've tried hasn't really worked. So I'd love your thoughts on if you see, if that makes sense, A, and then B, any other tips or specific exercises that you might sort of incorporate to work on that.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have strength, baseline strength in a range of motion, your body often interprets that as not a safe place to go. So certainly if you're not strong at end range, it could be a thing. My inclination, based on the fact that you move a lot, is probably not that your calves are weak. With knee to wall, when you get to your limit, where's the limiting factor? Where do you feel it? Is there any impingement?
Yeah, I get that anterior pinch.
Okay.
And
yeah,
and I've done the banded distraction, and I saw something where I think it was, I forget who it was, but they, there's the posterior glide and the anterior glide. I get that. I haven't really had success with that, but there was one where it was like working on the fibular head, and it was like the idea that might slip forward and create that sort of butting against for that tibia. Does that make sense? Like laterally, I guess it would be.
Yeah, I mean, the banded mobilizations are very, very tricky because they can be extremely powerful. Like we spend like a month in physio school learning these manual assisted mobilizations where I have someone in a lunge position on a high bed. I have their talus right in kind of like the fleshy part of my thumb. So I'm trying to glide their talus posteriorly, and I have my hand on the back of their ankle. So I'm trying to glide their tib fib anteriorly and their talus posteriorly, in hopes that, if this is happening with the impingement, if this is your talus and this is your tib fib, and you're coming forward and it's pinching there, the hope is if we can glide your tib fib forward slightly, we can get more clearance so that it opens up. Now, around that whole joint structure, there's like a layer of saran wrap, which is the joint capsule. And that thing can be super gnarly, so that if you ever had a restriction, if you ever had a sprained ankle, if you ever had super tight ankles, if you ever wore heeled footwear and it never let you go there oftentimes needs to be a lot of like just hard, gnarly work to try and open up some room in that capsule, so that you have a little bit of slack to work with, and then doing some sort of, and when I do the banded mobilization, like if you're doing this on yourself, this is your foot, this is your tib fib. So your calf would be like somewhere here. You want the band to be up like above your malleoli. So the base of the band should be above the point of your malleoli, those two bumps on your ankles. And I see this done sort of the wrong way a lot, where people put the band too low, too high. They do it from the front in the wrong angle. So when I used to do it, I would put the band around my ankle. I would go in a rack usually. I would fasten a band to the wall, and I would tension up the band so much when I was doing this on myself that if my foot lost contact with the ground, my foot would shoot forward. Like I put a ton of tension. And then what I would do is, if I started with my foot perpendicular to the wall where the band was, I would angle my foot slightly. So I would get a slightly different vector of the band. I don't know if this is, let me know if this is making sense. By
100%.
By rotating my foot slightly, I would get a slightly different angle of the tib fib. And eventually I would find the sweet spot where I could go and lean into it. And sometimes I'd actually put a plate on top of my knee in a lunge so that it had more downward pressure on my tib fib shank to push the tib fib kind of like, I would just do a bunch of experiments and try it a bunch of different ways. But I think the biggest thing is, don't underestimate how much tension you truly need to open up the capsule and to actually get a joint glide. It's probably way more than what you think is like safe. Because like I said, when my foot popped up, like the band would shoot my leg forward. It was pretty intense, but that's how much force you need to actually like glide the tib fib. So I don't think it has anything to do with your muscle if you're getting a pinch. What I would say is that when you do open up some space and move through that impingement, you're probably going to need to build some end range strength because you've never really spent time hanging out there before. So then once you have the hardware back, you got to layer on, your calf has to know how to fire strong in that range if you're going to feel stable using it. So they're gnarly, man. Have you ever had ankle injuries? Like any significant ones?
Yeah, I mean, playing basketball, like, I probably sprained both ankles 10 plus times. And then, for 10 years, my ankles were taped up. So there was like, I was wearing a cast. So like, it totally makes sense based on everything you're saying.
It's frustrating. I know. I did the same
frustrating
thing.
and like, but there's progress being made, but it's just slow. So that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So go ahead and jump in if you have a question. Just unmute yourself and ask away.
One thing I'll say is the hip is extremely important when it comes to dorsiflexion. Like dorsiflexion and hip extension are like this. You cannot get one without the other. So, what I've seen in the past and what I even used to I made all the mistakes as a physio. I did so many experiments with so many people that I quickly figured out what didn't work, but I had to do all the wrong things first to start to see which patterns just didn't work. And what I realized was that if I treated the ankle as an isolated subsystem and I didn't actually spend a good amount of time looking upstream at the hip, very little progress, if any, was made. Very little. The minute I started training people on balance beams, the minute I started to just get people standing on balance beams, getting their foot to be like your toes turn into little stability tentacles that are really playing a much bigger role. Right? If you do 10 minutes on a beam, your foot will be lit up. Your foot is working hard. And the foot working in harmony with the hip working, because your hip is your main stabilizer for your lower leg. People don't realize it, but the biggest thing you can do to prevent ankle sprains is train your balance at your hip. Because your hip is the biggest muscle group that can react to stop your ankle from rolling if it's getting close to there. And if the hip's not doing what it's supposed to, your knee and your ankle are like danger zones. And so as a result, the body says, well, we're not safe here, so we're just going to lock everything down. But if you don't work on the hip and like focus a decent amount on the hip and you're focusing all this energy on the ankle, it's slow goings. And so I think the less we train hip flexion, the more access we're going to have to hip extension. And you need hip extension to dorsiflex your ankle in the gait pattern. So if you can't, if you are about to, you're standing on your leg, you're slow motion walking and you're walking through your hip, the minute you hit a wall there, you can't go any further. And if you can't go any further, you can't move through dorsiflexion in a full gait cycle because you hit a wall. The wall at your hip creates a wall at your ankle. So one thing I would say is just like hips and ankle very tight. I've had people not even work on their ankle and just focus on their hip and their ankles start to improve in terms of range of motion because they're just, sometimes the hip is the limiting factor.
And it sounds like at first when you say work on your hip, my brain automatically thinks work on your resting squat, right? But that's not actually necessarily true because we're talking about hip extension.
Correct.
So yes, okay, I'm having
that's a good
here. I'm having a moment here.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So when I say work on your hip and in terms of extension, what I really mean is start to ungunkify all the tissues at the front of your hip, right? Like but if you point to literally the directly front of your hip, all those hip flexors, there's a ton of stuff there, right? Like you have iliopsoas, which is a deep hip flexor. You also have rec fem, which is a hip flexor. And you have a bunch of fascia and tissue and different layers in the front of your hip. And it basically just gets into this really gunky ball that almost is like someone has a vice grip at the front of your hip. So opening all that up with tissue work, getting in like almost like a lunge position with your heel down and shifting your hip forward. Like one thing I really like to do is to stagger my feet. So one foot's forward, one foot's back. If I had a tail, I'd tuck my tail, keep my heel glued to the floor, and then I shift my hips forward. You will feel this insane pull at the front, the whole front. Like mine goes all the way from like the bottom of my ribs down to like mid quad. This huge slice of tension there. And that's just where everything has just gotten really bunched up. And so, you know, like if I sit in a plane I've fallen asleep on some plane rides, like 6 hours out cold in a chair, in a body cast. And I get out and I'm like, whew, like I can feel the vice grip there, even when I'm walking off the little thingy coming off the plane. And so usually what I'll do is I'll just, if I have a ball or a hard roller, I'll just mush that part out for like even 30 seconds. I'll pull over to the side where I get out of the airplane thing, mush that out. And then every step I take as I'm walking through the rest of the airport, I'll kind of like shift my belt buckle forward a bit and try and make it so that I probably look like a goofball when I'm doing this, but I don't really care. I'll force myself into more hip extension. And it's almost like I'm trying to like re-lengthen that whole area that's just gotten really gunky, because I know if I don't do that and I walk for like an hour, my low back is going to feel it, because now my low back is where I'm getting the extension from, because I don't have any left of my hip. And it doesn't actually take that much, right? Like 6 hours in a chair cast doesn't mean I have to mobilize my hip for 6 hours, but I do need to do like a 5-minute blast to kind of recalibrate things, or else every step I take is going to be done with this vice grip at the front of my hips. So yeah, it's more, it's kind of case specific, but that's a good point, Ruth, because hip extension is not something, I mean, really with hip extension, it's really, the more important thing is to not spend time in hip flexion all the time. It's not even training hip extension. It's just don't accumulate too much time in that flex position. And you'll be much better off.
I want to turn it over to Liz, but I wanted to just say something really quick about hip flexion, because I teach yoga and so much of yoga trains hip flexion all the time. You know, like we hardly ever even, because the hip extension postures are pretty tough. And so just naturally, if you're teaching large classes with all different levels, you avoid some of those. And so anyway, I wanted to just say exactly right. So I just wanted to say that about like, so even the activities besides sitting in a chair that we think we're doing that are beneficial for our health movement wise are still training hip flexion in a repetitive way, you know?
Yeah. Good point.
So Liz, you're up.
Hello. I just wanted to add one quick thing. When you're talking about, so maybe this is like going controversial to what people are saying, but I think when Nick was talking about like avoiding training hip flexion, I'm assuming you mean avoiding like sitting a lot.
Yeah.
Training.
Yeah. Sorry. Inner, the funny thing is inner range hip flexion is also something that people end up kind of needing to work on, right? Because like
that's what I've been working on. Is I've been going along the experiment line of because I see so many videos about it everywhere, like training end range hip flexion. Like, you sit on the ground with your legs out and you lift your legs up and it like hurts like a bitch. But I think it's been really opening up my hips more. And it's the idea that like the muscle's not tight, it's just weak. So I think it's good to clarify like training hip flexion is good. Passively sitting in it constantly is not good because that's just contributing to the weak. But training it can make it strong and you can get better range of motion. But I don't know. I've been seeing like really big improvements in that lately, and that's been like my main experiment. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a good distinction because I like to say training hip flexion because it's like people are training their hips to be stiff all day. They don't even know it. But you're right. Passively being in a chair cast is not the same as actively training something. So that's a good point.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all I wanted to add.
Cool. Thanks for adding that.
Hi, I'm new. I have a question.
Go for it.
I have fallen arches, like my feet aren't completely flat, but I have little to no arch. How do I order the right shoes on Foot Collector or any shoe?
So restoring an arch really just boils down to starting to use your feet again. So there isn't technically like first of all, any footwear that we sell at the footcollective.store is a website, has gone through our filter of being like, this is natural footwear. This abides by our philosophy of they're flat, they're flexible, they're shaped like feet, and they have a thin sole. So any shoe there is going to work. It just depends on how much you want to spend, what you're using the shoe for, what you like the look of, what fits your foot well. So there's really not a shoe that stops you from having arches that are lower or because even having flat feet, I mean, I don't want to get too deep into that because that's a deep conversation, but your arch is supposed to move, right? It's a dynamic arch. So it's supposed to flatten and it's supposed to rise. And you need both of those. If you're stuck in either one of those, it's not good because then you don't have your foot is not as dynamic. Your foot can't adapt as much. By getting rid of shoes that support your arch, you automatically start to strengthen your arch whenever you're fighting gravity. So really it's just spend some time barefoot, wear shoes that don't have arch support built in, transition into them gradually if you're coming off of shoes that have had a huge amount of support or orthotics. But yeah, any shoes at the footcollective.store will be great to help you rebuild an arch, restore an arch, because it really is just like building muscle, right? I think releasing the bottom of your foot with a cork ball or a lacrosse ball is very important as well, because if your foot is used to being in a flattened position and none of the joints are used to moving, you kind of have to mobilize those joints again so that they can articulate enough so that you can start to form an arch again. So it's like get the bones moving, get the joints moving so that your foot can adapt to, your foot can get into a variety of shapes. And then by not supporting your foot, once it's able to move in a variety of shapes, your muscles are automatically going to start to build and strengthen, and you're going to start to get an arch back. And it's like, this is just how the body works. It happens. You just have to be patient, and you have to know that by releasing the stiffness in the foot and by wearing shoes that don't support your arch, you will reclaim an arch. Whether it's obvious or not, it's happening. You just have to trust the process. Does that help?
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Perfect.
And,
Good question.
Don't forget about the hips.
And the hips. The hips are a big one. And we have this experiment called Hip Torque. I don't know if it's publicly available on YouTube. It's in the health kit. But basically, this experiment gets you to consciously rotate your hips and see what your feet are doing when you're doing that. And actually, how do you say your name? Docha?
Dorsha.
Dorsha, if you stand up with your feet parallel and you bend your knees slightly and you look at what your feet do, and then all I want you to do is push your knees as far out as they can go without your feet coming off, and then bring your knees together. So standing, feet parallel, hip width apart, you're barefoot, bend your knees slightly, move your knees out, move your knees in. Don't let your feet lift up off the ground, but as you're doing that, check out your feet. And usually what you're gonna see is the arch of your foot is gonna rise and it's gonna flatten. And that's just a really good indicator that all you're doing there is consciously doing something at your hip, and it's changing the shape of your arch. And I think that we like that experiment because it reinforces the fact that your hips are really the primary control joint for the position of your foot. Your hips create your arch. So yeah, it's not just about the foot. That was good mention, Ruth. And if you do, if you work on both those things, if you get in the right shoes and you're reducing your sitting and you're doing a little bit of work to just move your hips in a variety of ways, it can even mean like dancing once a day and doing a bunch of weird, funky movements with your hip. That's going to help long term.
Yeah. Dance, Dorcha, dance.
Dance.
Okay. Thank you.
You're
And I
welcome.
have been doing some of those things and it makes a difference, but the shoes I have are worn out. So it's kind of hard to tell right now.
Gotcha.
So that's why I had my question.
Perfect. Yeah, with shoes, the simpler the better. And every shoe tells a story. So by the time you're done with a certain pair of shoes, the wear patterns on the bottom of that shoe and just like where it's worn down will tell you kind of a story. And that story will change as you're working on your body. So yeah, just trust the process. Keep it. Sounds like you're doing the right things. You just gotta keep it up, be consistent, and you'll do great.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So we got 4 minutes left.
And I just wanted to address this, like just for the group and for our future conversations that we have, like anybody who has, like, we really want to avoid the idea that any one person has all the answers, right, Nick? So like we've tried to talk about this a lot, that we have this idea about creating a hive mindset with all of our experience together. So please feel free, like Alex, Nick, anybody, Mimi, Dorsha, anybody who has experience can offer their experience to another person that can be helpful. So while Nick has a lot of experience with a lot of different, clinic and patient, experience, he also wants to make sure that we, do our part, and we have lots to share with each other too. So we want to just try to avoid the idea that any one person has all the answers, because we all collect. And also, I don't want to exhaust him.
I was giving too many answers, wasn't I, Ruth?
No, not at all. But I think that we have a natural tendency, myself included, to go to, it's just natural that one person who has the most experience, gives the knower and the people who are seeking. We are trying to really avoid that model. So I know that there are a lot of people who come on, like Aaron, Cooper, and you people who all have different experiences, and Alex, and Nick. There's a lot of different people with a lot of different variety of backgrounds here. So we want to try to create a community that really does help each other and share our experience together. So I just want to say that as we go forward in these community calls. Yeah.
Yes, great point.
Ooh.
The power of story is very powerful. We all share our stories and our insights. Then we all can kind of like collectively adopt the best insights, right? Mm-hmm. That's kind of what the essence of foot nerd training is: create a tight community of people who want to engage with the process of restoring foot health and want to help others, and create a container where we have these conversations where we deeply care about this and we're putting a lot of energy into it and we're sharing what we do, so that everyone else can learn from the mistakes and the wins that we each have individually. And then collectively, we just end up learning at such an accelerated rate, way more than any one individual of us could learn, which I think is super cool. And that same effect actually happens with Health Kit. Like what we do with Health Kit is everyone's going through this 6-week process of restoring their foot health. They give us feedback, they go through experiments, they let us know what they like and don't like, the things they're learning. We learn from that and incorporate that new intelligence that everyone kind of gives us through feedback into the Health Kit, so that the future people, it's like the first 20 people that did the Health Kit got a certain version, and then the next 100 got a different version because the previous 20 gave their feedback to make it better. And so as this rolls forward, we end up with a really powerful evolving tool that is actually learning as it's doing, right? As more people use it and incorporate it and get benefit from it, it learns, it gets smarter. We get better at knowing the cheat codes, I like to call them, right? It's like you can work for 6 months restoring your feet and learn, it turns out there's only 2 things I need to do and that's it. Well, if we tell everyone those cheat codes, everyone can just improve way faster, right? They still have to do their own exploration. Certainly those aren't going to be hardcore answers, but yeah, so it's 8:30. Time flies when you're having fun. I hope we got to everyone's questions. We like to start these on time and end these on time. We will do them every month. We'll announce them on Instagram. On the tfcfootnerd.com website, you go there, you can click on the community call tab. We will put the recordings to these calls on that tab so that they're there forever if you want to re-listen to something. You can submit questions for future ones if you can't tune in. And you'll also be able to get the link for the call each month, and we'll cycle through different topics. I think probably we'll stick to core foot topics because we're foot nerds and that's how we roll. But we will open it up to questions. If you're on the call and you're present, you will get priority in terms of asking questions. And if we get to the ones emailed in, great. We didn't today, but we'll try to in future. And we do keep in mind those questions so that, the posts we do and the free content we create, like we'll try and address them. If we see a common thread of questions, we'll try and address that. So Ruth, you got anything to say?
Yeah, if you were on the call tonight and you had a question that you didn't, feel comfortable to ask, or you were in the middle of getting out of the tub or something, then go ahead and email me your specific question at nerdhelperteam@gmail.com, and then we'll put your question to the nerds in our little cyber office space, and I'll email you the answer back. Like we'll try to point you in the right direction. So if you actually were here and you had a question that didn't get answered, we'll do that for you. Just make sure and email me. And when I load this up onto YouTube, I'll make sure and put the Gmail account there, but it's also on the community call page. So feel free to email me, and that goes directly to our internal team. So we'll get to you. So thank you for showing up and being here with us.
Thanks for quarterbacking this, Ruth. Ruth is the one that actually makes this happen. I just get to show up and talk. It's great. So thank you, Ruth. Thank you to all the nerds for being nerds and for being here. And love you all. Have a good evening, and we'll catch you next month.
Yeah, we'll see you next month.
Ciao.
Bye. Have a great night, everyone.
Yeah.